soccer rap is to die for.
Welcome to Stuff with Jon Rothstein. Best player you don't know in college basketball.
We have a very high bar on this show. I've let myself go, I'd be 400 pounds. I just want to make sure I don't go all in on chocolate chip pancakes at the diner down the street.
Forget about not sleeping until May. I may not sleep at all, but I wouldn't trade it for anything else. College hoops. Everything else is just secondary. Who's ready to nosh? Welcome to Stuff with Jon Rothstein. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. A fantastic new year on this end. Hope the same was true for you. Later in the show, we are going to be joined by Gonzaga star Corey Kispert. Also going to take some of your questions about what the comings and goings in college basketball. But first, let's get to some big picture storylines about college hoops in a New York Minute. And we start with the key announcement of the week. The NCAA formally announced on Monday that the 2021 NCAA tournament will take place in Indianapolis as a whole. I am very, very adamant about this, and I am somebody who always goes through every day of life with a mindset of looking at the glass being half full. Shout out to our friends right here at Morning Combat, rather than half empty. And I've said for months right now, I'm well aware that we are operating things right now in the middle of a once-in-a-century global pandemic. But as of this morning, over 95% of the teams that opted to play college basketball this year are up and running. We know there's going to be cancellations. We know there's going to be postponements. We know there's still going to be bumps in the road from now until Selection Sunday on March 14th. But the announcement by the NCAA signals what we've been working towards all along. There will be an NCAA tournament, unlike last season. And one team that is going to be a part of that NCAA tournament and has a chance to advance deep in the NCAA tournament is Texas. Texas made a major statement Saturday at Fog Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas, beating the Jayhawks by 25 points. It was the worst home loss ever for Bill Self at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. And I think one thing we're seeing with the elite teams in college basketball this year, Gonzaga, Baylor, Villanova, Texas, they all have player retention from a year ago. Everybody likes to get excited about incoming players in college basketball. Returning players are much more critical. Texas reiterates that. And then finally, while we've had a great deal of focus this season on the strength of the Big 12 and the strength of the Big 10, I see nothing but questions in the ACC and the SEC. Kentucky struggles are one thing, but last week, just days after Tennessee beat Missouri by 20 in Columbia, they fall at home to Alabama. And the ACC right now is operating without vintage Duke, without vintage Virginia, and without vintage North Carolina. There's a lot of questions surrounding the top of that league. And one league that there's definitely not questions about is the WCC, because the WCC has an anchor in the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and the star forward for Gonzaga now joins us here on Stuff with Jon Rothstein. He is Corey Kispert. And Corey, my well-embedded moles in Spokane tell me that even though you're a stalwart basketball player, Corey Kispert is a pretty good golfer as well. How are you so good at both sports?
I guess I spend a lot of time in the summer doing it. The courses kind of freeze up over the winter, so I can't play all year round, but every single piece of free time I can get in the summer is spent on the golf course. And I absolutely love it. I eat it up, and the golf bug's bitten me pretty much as hard as it can.
Well, it's bitten a lot of basketball players who wish to do something after they're done playing, but you've got a long way to go until you're done playing hoops, and you're 10-0 right now after a big win Saturday against San Francisco. You've played on some great teams during your career at Gonzaga. What is the biggest difference that you found in the group that you're playing with right now versus the other teams that you've been a part of with the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I mean, I've had super talented teams, and like you said, teams in the past, we've had some really efficient offenses, but this year, I think more than any year, every single guy on the floor can get it done, and every single guy on the floor can have a big night. And we know that, and the way that we pop the ball around makes it really hard to guard and pretty fun to watch, too, just as a fan of college hoops.
You know, Corey, your team played a very, very aggressive non-conference schedule, and it had several, key matchups during the non-conference portion of the schedule. And I thought the interesting thing about your slate in November and December was you faced different styles. You saw, obviously, the slower pace of Virginia. You faced, obviously, the toughness of West Virginia. And you also took on, a program like Kansas and a program like Iowa. How much do you think seeing that variety of styles will better prepare your team for the NCAA tournament?
Oh, it was awesome. Having to prepare for those teams kind of on the fly, especially with West Virginia, with that game being scheduled about a week in advance from when it was played. Just being light on your feet and being flexible and being able to prepare for the different styles is exactly what the NCAA tournament, the challenge that it puts forward to you. And credit to Coach Few and the guys who schedule our games around here to kind of weave that little twist into the mix of the different styles. And we had a ton of fun playing those different teams, and we kind of had to put a different version of Gonzaga out there slightly every single game, and it was a fun challenge, and we really, really loved it. And I hope those teams loved competing against us as much as we did with them.
Well, they probably didn't like competing against you as much because you were always winning by a decisive margin, and a big reason for that was your freshman point guard, Jalen Suggs. I know that Jalen Suggs came to Gonzaga with tremendous pedigree, but when was the first time that you said to yourself, this kid might be a little bit different?
When he caught the lob against Kansas. That was that sealed the deal for me. He impressed me a bunch in our training camp and the workouts that we had. And if you meet Jalen, you would never guess that he has the hype that he has around him. He does a really good job of being present in the moment and taking care of the guys on the team and being super down to earth. But when he went up and caught that lob, one of the first plays of Kansas, I kind of buckled up, and I've been watching him kind of as a fan now, and I really enjoy watching him play. And he's been a stud for us all year.
Well, he's been a stud. Drew Timme's obviously taken a major step as a sophomore, and you're playing the best basketball of your career. For you personally, what is the biggest reason that you cite for your own individual improvement?
Just staying with it. Commitment, man. 4 years here has been a long grind, and I've had a lot of chances to kind of work on myself and become a better player. And I think all the work that I've put in is kind of coming to fruition this year. Just little things that you kind of take in each off season and work on. And luckily I've had a good enough year at this point that I've kind of been given some freedom and given a little bit of chance to kind of flex the muscles and show what I have. And I'm really thankful that the year's gone this way because I'm playing with a lot more freedom out there, and I'm really enjoying the way that we play, especially, and it's been good for me as an individual as well.
And you were somebody, like a lot of your teammates and other players in college basketball, that went through the NBA draft process and wanted to test the waters. What would you describe that process as being like?
It was really, really interesting, especially this year. I've had a bunch of teammates go through it in a normal year, and they're traveling from city to city, doing workouts, getting physicals done, all that stuff. But for me, it was done from my couch at home. A bunch of Zoom calls, talking with different teams, and getting advice from our coaching staff. A lot of the feedback that I heard was kind of through our coaching staff. So I was just trying to soak up everything like a sponge, retain as much information as possible, and take every piece of advice for what it was worth. Not overblowing or kind of underselling anything. And thankfully, I had really, really good people in my corner, and the people who from the NBA gave me really honest and sound feedback. And every game that I play this year is just I'm just so thankful for the choice that I made. That was kind of the big decision kind of going in, as we didn't know what kind of a season we were going to have, how many games we were going to play, and what it was going to look like. So every single game we play, and every chance I kind of get to go out there and prove myself again is just validation for the choice that I made. And so far, at this moment, I'm super, super happy with what I did, and I wouldn't change it.
Well, and you're validating yourself too against some of the best teams in the country. But one major difference for you and for a lot of college players this year is the lack of fans in attendance. And everybody knows that Gonzaga has one of the great home court advantages in college basketball at the Kennel. What is it like for you guys to have no fans in attendance at home games?
That first game we played here was really sad, to be honest. And I think you've been here, and you know what it's like. You can feel the energy, and you can feel the passion that Spokane has for GU basketball. And I mean, that just gets sucked out of the building when you take the fans out of it. So, trying to do our best to create our own energy. I mean, you hear that kind of narrative throughout, the NBA with their bubble, and teams this year kind of repeat that as well. The team that kind of creates their own energy and lights their own fire the most is most likely going to win. So, practicing that every day and being intentional about that is a huge key to success this year. And we've done a good job of it. And we're, although the kennel isn't in the kennel, we're trying to make it still a pretty tough home environment, and our record shows that so far.
Well, it's an adjustment, just like we're all adjusting to obviously this once-in-a-century global pandemic, and there has to be sacrifices. And all college kids, all college student athletes and players are sacrificing a lot of things to have a season this year. I'm curious, though, for your perspective. So many people talk about the mental health of the players during this process. But I'm curious, what would the mental health be like for you guys right now if we weren't playing basketball games?
That's a great question. To be honest, I'm not really sure. I think that a lot of guys kind of give up, their social lives and, all the other things just for basketball. And I'm sure guys would kind of find ways to fill the hole. If basketball wasn't being played, I think a lot of guys would be off doing different things and kind of chasing different dreams. But thankfully we don't have to worry about that, and we don't have to, even entertain that kind of a question. It's fun to think about, but I'm really thankful that we're playing, and I'm really thankful that the sacrifices that we make are worth it. For the kind of year that we've put together.
Well, we're all thankful that you're playing too, because we get to cover your team, and we all get to be a part of what we love. But we've established that you're obviously a great player. We've established that you're a capable golfer. But other people have told me that you're capable in other sports as well, including water sports. How do you deal with that in addition to everything else? And who influenced you in that area? Was it Mark Few?
He had a big influence. There's very few things that in a normal conversation kind of perks Coach Few's ears up. And if you know him really well, his dogs and his family are one of them. Fishing, fly fishing is another, and then his wake surfing ability is kind of his that's his pride and joy. He has his competition with his kids, and so when I mentioned to him kind of early on that I had dabbled in it before I got here. He made sure I heard about it. He made sure I heard about, the different things he was doing and how good he was getting. And so he's been a huge influence for that. And he's part of the reason why I've kind of stayed dialed into that kind of part of my life, is because how passionate he is.
Well, it's well documented, and he'll be the first person to tell you that he wants to win as much as anybody, but he obviously appreciates the balance in his life, whether it's water sports or his family. But he obviously does want to win. And a couple of years ago in 2017, he was a couple of plays away from bringing a national championship to Gonzaga. For you personally, for your teammates, what would it mean to be the team that brought Mark Few his first national championship?
That would mean the world, not only to him and how hard he's worked and the kind of hours he's put into this program and the way that he's turned it into what it is, but for the city in general. I mean, I was one of the millions of people sitting and watching that game when it was going on live, and I was committed to GU at that point and very, very invested in the team, and my heart broke for them. And they don't want to. I mean, obviously, all the guys, I know the guys on that team, and they don't want to sit and take everyone's pity, but there's definitely a chip on everyone's shoulder, the whole city's shoulder, because of that game and the way that it went. It would mean the absolute world to me and to the city and to Coach Few to finally bring that home. And if it's not this year's team, I think the program's on a really good trajectory and has a really good chance of getting that thing done in the next 5-10 years.
Well, Corey, you and your teammates have ripped through some of the best teams in the country with ease here during the first 2 months of the season, but you're in practice every day. We're not. From now until the start of the NCAA tournament, what do you think are the biggest things that Gonzaga needs to improve on to be the team that gives Mark Few his first national championship?
Yeah, well, thankfully, the answer to that question is the biggest things that we need to work on are actually pretty small things, and it's really fun to kind of pick ourselves apart and really work on and dissect what we need to get done in order to compete with the big dogs come March. I think, and especially, the thing we need to work on most happens on the defensive end of the floor. things like communication, tightening up rotations, all that little stuff that turns a good defensive team into a great defensive team is what we're working for, and that's part of the challenge that comes with playing for this team, is that there's you have to win every single game you play, but there's also kind of bigger challenges that you can kind of chip away at as the year goes on, and that's what makes competing with these guys so fun day in and day out at practice, is you're really just making each other better in the midst of the season.
And usually in the NCAA tournament, to have a chance to go and win 6 games and win a national championship, you have players on your team that are projected to be at the next level. You've mentioned that you went through the NBA draft process. Obviously, Jalen Suggs is expected to be a high draft pick. But, people love when they're forecasting players for the future to play the comparison game. If Corey Kispert could compare himself to one player, past or present, who would it be?
Is that a GU player or just
anybody in general in basketball?
That's a good question. In college, this is kind of a corny cliche answer that everyone's kind of started to use, and I've kind of gotten to know him personally as well. But Joe Harris is someone that I've really modeled my game after. He's turned into an elite kind of 3-and-D guy in the NBA. One of the top shooters in the league, and that's why he's getting paid. But in college, he could do it all. He had 40 on Duke at one point in his time in Virginia, and nasty defender, a great player, super smart and heady, and he's an ultra competitor too. He really gets after it. He tries to win every single thing that he does, and that's the mark of a great player. And kind of those little things are some of the stuff that I take from him, especially in his college career too. And it's definitely carried over and gotten him to the point he is now in his NBA career, where he's kind of getting some long-term success that he definitely deserves.
Well, Corey, you're getting pretty good at this media thing. You've had an answer for every question, but another thing that I've learned about you is that in addition to all the sports that you play, you're also not somebody who's hesitant in the kitchen. I hear that Corey Kispert loves to cook. What are the biggest things that you enjoy cooking when you have the time?
Well, man, I tell you what, I had a mean breakfast burrito this morning. Peppers, onions, bacon, guacamole, the whole lot, salsa. It was delicious. I really enjoyed my breakfast this morning. And then for dinner, a big Pacific Northwest guy out of Seattle, so seafood's kind of my thing. I love cooking salmon. Salmon has a really special place in my heart, so that's kind of my go-to, and that's my signature dish in the kitchen. If you will.
Final thing, food's a big part of my life. It's a big part of this show. I'm sure you know that by seeing that. I have a wrap in front of me with chicken and avocado. But basketball has afforded you the opportunity to travel the world. You've been all over the country playing different games. If Corey Kispert could have one meal at one place, where would it be? What would it be?
Wow. So there's a restaurant in my hometown of Edmonds, Washington, called the Beach Cafe, and it sits right on the water. Great view of the Puget Sound. Got ferry boats and little schooners kind of rolling in and out. It's a great view. It's probably there. And then it's hard for me to beat a really good steak. If I had to choose one meal for the rest of my life, or one meal to have right now, it'd probably be a really, really good steak. Right on the water at the Beach Cafe. They got amazing bread. That's kind of their thing. So definitely lots of bread to load up on before the steak comes out.
I can't wait to talk to you when you get to be 30 or 35, when you can't crush the bread basket anymore. But Corey Kispert knocking down three-point shots, knocking all these questions out of the park. Corey, congratulations on a great start to the season. Stay safe, stay positive, test negative. And again, best of luck throughout the rest of the season. Thanks for joining us here today on Stuffed.
Yeah, thanks, John. Really appreciate the time.
You got it. It's Gonzaga sharpshooting wing Corey Kispert. We're going to have a little bit of a nosh right now. I'm going to take a little bit of this rap, and it's time now for our portion of the show called Don't At Me, Bro, where I answer your questions on the world of college basketball. I'm going to read these questions on Twitter. I'm at Jon Rothstein. That's John, Jon. But first right here, a nice chicken avocado wrap. Wow. That's better than I expected. There's some kind of mix here with the avocado and the sauce. That's cool. That's really good. I wasn't expecting it to be that good. I'm trying to lean up a little bit from the holidays, but what a wrap. Okay, our first question from Lance Rasmussen. John, Utah's blowing out lower tier Mountain West teams while the upper crust is showing cracks. Are the Aggies contender for a three-peat? Who is their biggest obstacle? I've noticed Utah State turning a corner, Marco Anthony, the Virginia transfer, doing yeoman's work, leading the Aggies in scoring. Their biggest obstacles, though, San Diego State and Boise State. And Boise State, Leon Rice told me on Monday, is expected to get Devonair Dutrieve, the Arizona transfer, eligible for Wednesday's game. Good question. How about more of this wrap? This is from Braden Kemmerer. John, what mid-major is the one to look out for so far this season? You know, I want to make this clear. I do not consider teams from the Atlantic 10 or the Mountain West mid-majors. So forget about St. Louis, forget about Boise State, San Diego State. They're better than that, in my opinion. You have to look at Drake, who's undefeated, 13-0, 12 wins by double figures. You have to look at Western Kentucky at a Conference USA. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention BYU, another team from the West Coast Conference. Winthrop with Pat Kelsey is having a very, very good start. A lot of different options for mid-majors right now. Next question. This is from Chilean Miners Superfan. It's John. When a cook returns, many people are saying UConn will be the greatest team on all time. What are your thoughts? Well, I think you had some vodka with your breakfast this morning. Let's let UConn crawl before it can walk first. The Huskies have not played a road game in true form this season. That changes tonight at Marquette. And the Huskies' next two games after that are also on the road. Do think a cook will help UConn, though. Next up, from Abi, is Kadari Richmond of Syracuse, the most underrated freshman in the country. He's definitely one of them, and I think he's fallen a little bit off the radar because Syracuse had to go on pause. But he has all the makings of being a starter, in my opinion, by the end of the season. This is from Noah Bennick, and it's John, how confident are you in Michigan right now? You know, Michigan, 3-4-5, with Wagner, Livers, Hunter Dickinson, as good as any team in college basketball. And look, I know that the teams that they've beaten to get to 4 Big Ten wins are not at the top of the league. Those 4 teams have a combined record of 4-13. But you have to beat the teams on your schedule. I think we'll have a better feel for just how good Michigan is after Wednesday night's game against a very good Minnesota team. This is from Tuna, and it's John. What are your thoughts on the St. Louis Billikens making a deep run in March Madness this year? Well, I've been saying it since over the summer. St. Louis has a chance to be the best non-power conference team in college basketball. And no pun intended, they're living up to the billing. This is the class of the A-10, already have wins this year over LSU and NC State. St. Louis follow-up from Grant McCullough. What do you think of Jordan Goodwin from St. Louis? As underappreciated a guard as there is in the sport, how often in college basketball do you see guards averaging 10 rebounds? This is the type of player that could star during the NCAA tournament. And our next question is from Andy, and it's John. Who is your favorite to win the tourney of teams outside of the top 5? That's a hard question, but I will say this. One team that I think is built for the NCAA tournament that isn't ranked in the top 5 is Wisconsin. The Badgers start 5 seniors, 3 fifth-year seniors, and their backup point guard is also a fifth-year senior. How rare is it in college basketball that you have multiple kids on your team or everybody in your starting lineup that can legally purchase alcohol? This is from Duke coverage, and it's John. Is Drake a top 25 team? Is Duke a top 5 seed in the tournament? Need to see more from Duke. They return to action this week against Boston College. Too early to see Drake being a top 25 team. Need to watch him Sunday against Loyola Chicago. And the next question comes from T, and it's John. Who's the best player on Tennessee's roster? He said the Vols. I'm a defense guy, so I'm going to look at Yves Pons. Yves Pons, to me, is the most indispensable player on Tennessee's roster because of the way he can erase mistakes within a moment's notice. It's a big game for Tennessee this week against Arkansas. The Vols looked like a juggernaut last week at Missouri. They came home. They didn't play well against Alabama. Part of the issue was just a lack of effectiveness in turning the game back around. It's a big game for them this week. That's it for Don't At Me, Bro. Now let's get to the segment 4 of the show, which I call News and Nuggets. Sorry about the little burp right there. But, before we get to the news and nuggets, I'll admit this. Up until about a year ago, I had no idea what Netflix was. I was somebody who just ordered things off digital cable. Had no idea what Netflix was. Shout out to my beautiful fiance, Alana, for showing me the door and getting up with technology. But I never was somebody who watched shows on Netflix, and I have refound and rediscovered my passion for the Karate Kid through Cobra Kai. I never obviously do a lot in terms of watching movies or other things during college basketball season, but during a day last week where we only really had a couple of games from Conference USA, I found a window to rewatch Cobra Kai, and it was outstanding. If you want to obviously turn back to our youth, if you're somebody between 30 and 40, look into that show. A couple of nuggets right here as I break out my Hulkamadian lunchbox. Speaking of going back to our youth. By the way, I was talking about this the other day. I still think sweet potato fries is better than me. I still think it was a horrible idea by Vince McMahon not to put Hogan against Flair in the main event of WrestleMania 8. So good every week. Okay, a couple of nuggets for you to chew on here as I eat my sweet potato fries. Seton Hall's Jared Rhoden is on the verge of becoming a star in the Big East. In his last 5 games, he's averaging 18.2 points and 7.8 rebounds. He looks like a legitimate running mate next to Sandro Mamokilishvili. Does Houston have a top 10 culture in college basketball? Maybe top 5. Earlier this year, the Cougars won a game when Kelvin Sampson couldn't coach because of COVID-19 protocols. His son Kellen, the top assistant, couldn't coach due to COVID-19 protocols. And they also had several players out due to COVID-19. Then on Sunday, they go to SMU, the quote-unquote second-best team, at least thought by many, in the American Athletic Conference, without Caleb Mills, the preseason player of the year in the league, and win the game at Moody Coliseum. Culture is a thing that's often turned around in college basketball and tossed around regularly. It's a compliment when you watch Houston play. Their product isn't dictated by who or who isn't available. And then lastly, I had mentioned the big game this week between Minnesota and Michigan. The guy that is turning a corner for Minnesota is Liam Robbins. The Drake transfer was dominant against Ohio State on Sunday night. 27, 14, and 5. It's rare to think of the idea of a 7-footer back in college basketball, but we have a matchup of 7-footers coming up Wednesday night in Ann Arbor. Hunter Dickinson of Michigan, of course, obviously Liam Robbins of Minnesota going head-to-head in that game. And some games to watch for tonight. Rutgers is at Michigan State. Since joining the Big Ten in 2014, Rutgers is 0-9 against the Spartans. Only one game has been decided by double figures. Can Alabama have an encore tonight against Florida? Javon Quinterly, the Villanova transfer, doing very well during Alabama's 3-game winning streak. Kansas goes to TCU. Bill Self told me a couple hours ago via text message that Marcus Garrett is 50-50 for the game. He banged his head in Saturday's loss to Texas. And then finally, UConn against Marquette. UConn's a team right now that, is a play away from being undefeated with a win over Creighton. They're a little bit off the radar nationally. They've had a couple of issues with COVID-19 and have had to pause the programs a couple of times. If UConn can get this win tonight, they will then go on the road. 2 games at Butler, 2 at DePaul. If they're a contender in the Big East, this is the type of game that you have to win. You have to beat a very good Marquette team on its own floor. And remember, Marquette's a team that has already beaten Wisconsin this year and has already won a game at Creighton. We'd like to thank Gonzaga sharpshooter Corey Kispert for joining us here on Stuff with Jon Rothstein. We'll be back next week, same bad time, same bad channel. And remember, in the airport of life, college basketball is the Delta Sky Club. Stay positive, test negative. Have a great week, everybody.